Hi everyone, my name is Hubble. I'm going to be talking with you today about selection tools for Spanish language materials in a public library setting. Specifically, we'll take a look at publishers themselves and then just other general vendors who sell Spanish language materials. We'll also look at Spanish language literary awards from around the world, including both in Spain and in Latin America. Book fairs, which are also international in a number of different countries. Also services providing book reviews. And finally, really just namely one professional organization that concerns itself with serving Spanish-speaking patrons in the public library. So I do want to point out also what I'm not going to cover. So as the slide said, this is concentrated just on adult materials. So I'm not going to discuss kids materials. That could be its own subject in and of itself. And I also didn't include any information about ELL or ESL materials, chiefly because the selection tools and the criteria there for choosing English learning materials are likely going to be quite a bit different than for the types of recreational and educational materials that I was concerned with for an adult collection. So having said that, it certainly wouldn't be uncommon for a librarian, for a selector, to be responsible for both of those areas. And in fact, the selectors that I spoke with and that I know in the library are tasked with both of those. It's just the selection tools are going to be a little different between those two subjects. This is just a quick look at the ALA's guidelines for serving Spanish-speaking patrons. So what I've cut out from their website here is just the subsection discussing collection development. They have a lot of other information too, just about general service to Spanish speakers in the public library. But certainly a theme that I noted throughout the readings that I did. And in ALA's guidelines as well, is really to have a focus on your specific community in mind when doing selection of these materials. So I think there might kind of be a misconception, perhaps among selectors and the public at large, that we have an idea of treating the Spanish-speaking community kind of as a homogeneous block. And the reality is that the Spanish-speaking world, just like the Anglophone world, is very different culturally, linguistically, politically, etc. So any good, collection plan and policy for Spanish-speaking patrons for Spanish language materials should go hand in hand with a thorough community analysis to assess your community's needs and preferences, etc. So specifically, the differences between the Spanish dialects around the world they're significant, much more so than between the varieties of English, for example, spoken in the U.S. or England or Australia. The Spanish, especially between Europe and much of Latin America, is very distinct, and it's more than just cosmetic differences in terms of sound changes and things like that. There's some core vocabulary and even writing styles that are going to change from country to country. That's really important to keep in mind when selecting materials. So for example, if for translated works from English that you'll commonly see in a Spanish language collection, you'd want to make sure not to use what's called Castilian Spanish, or the Spanish spoken in Spain, and to try to get a more local, more than likely Latin American version of that translated work, which was something I hadn't really considered until I dug into this a little bit. So having said all of that about not approaching this as a homogeneous group, publishers and others in the industry do recognize several core subjects which are generally of interest to Spanish speakers. So to a degree, these subjects here are kind of going to mirror the English language collection as well. But these few subjects, your collection certainly shouldn't have a shortage of any of these. You want to make sure you have a um, robust collection of these materials as well. Specifically with publishers, most domestic publishers or book vendors will also offer Spanish materials. So as you'd expect, you can browse titles online and then also through the ubiquitous print catalogs that we have in the library. I spoke with one of my colleagues who does the selection of Spanish materials in one of the libraries where I work to get her overall thoughts and impressions. She really likes, and this is the screen grabs here that are in the next couple slides demonstrate this. But she likes Penguin Random House. They do a live webcast between folks at the publishing firm and then librarians and selectors, which I thought was a really great idea to have kind of a live interface like that, where they're on a monthly basis. They'll introduce new titles and things like that, and you can discuss that in real time with the publisher. So certainly, the titles that are on these slides here, these are going to be kind of popular titles from English, and then some original Spanish as well. So in addition to, of course, the popular translations into Spanish, a well-rounded collection should certainly also have original Spanish works, and this process should be done while keeping in mind the linguistic and cultural details of our community. So here's a quick look at just a handful of vendors here. The two on the left are vendors that work kind of on behalf of publishers. So these can be good sources as well, since they're not necessarily tied to their own content as much as a publisher would be. But in reality, there would be nothing wrong with using existing vendors of your English language material, at least for the start or for the core of your Spanish language collection. But over time, it's going to be important too to vary your sources to expose yourself to a good mix of materials. Another resource to use to familiarize yourself with Spanish language writers and literature at large are the various literary awards. So the last three on the slide, the first four are from Spain, and those aren't necessarily Spanish writers; those are general Spanish language. I believe the first one is just for Spain, for an actual Spanish writer. But the three on the bottom are all awarded in Mexico. Most other Latin American countries will have similar literary awards to consider as well. So this can be a really great resource to keep yourself abreast of, the most popular books in these countries, and allow you to localize and focus your resources on the local level to the language that your community speaks. Next, book fairs, of course, can be a great resource to meet publishers and vendors and authors, etc., and just familiarize yourself with Spanish language literature. If you work in a library whose budget would allow you to go to any of the three listed here, I'd certainly be jealous and envious if you had that opportunity. But no worry, there are also domestic book fairs as well. So in Miami and in Southern California, they're host of some pretty significant events. The last event on the slide here is sponsored by the University of Guadalajara in Mexico, called FIL. And this, based on what I've read, is really the most important book fair in the Spanish-speaking world, and it is absolutely massive. So some of the information I read described it as the largest book fair in the Western Hemisphere, simply by volume. So if you do have to pick one, Guadalajara is relatively close. This is certainly the one to go to. And if you can afford to get there, ALA will pay your entry fees to get into the book fair and all the fees associated with that. So this is definitely the preeminent book fair for Spanish language materials. Book reviews as well can be very helpful in giving you some more customized information about materials to select. So the professional, serial library journal and others like Publishers Weekly that we'll see in the library will have periodic reviews of Spanish language materials, just as a matter of course. So actually the Publishers Weekly, they publish the actual Nielsen ratings monthly of the most popular Spanish titles by sales, which can be a really good resource, and you can sort that between adult and children materials. I did want to mention the third website here, AmericaReadSpanish.org. I spent quite a bit of time browsing their site, so they've got some great reviews of materials as well, but they're also just an association that promotes Spanish language literacy widely here in the United States, so that can be a good resource, not just for collections, but other services to Spanish speakers. Finally, I have to mention Reforma here. So this is the predominant professional organization for librarians concerned with any type of Spanish language library services. So if you have Spanish speakers in the community, in the library in which you work, I would encourage you to take a look at Reforma's site and some services that they may be able to offer you. They've got some great guidelines for selectors and collections developers. The group divides itself into regional chapters. So Illinois we're in the Midwest chapter. So in addition to simply joining the organization, it would probably behoove a selector in this area to reach out to the regional chapter officers and whatnot to try to get some more localized information as well. Okay, thanks for watching, guys, and I look forward to viewing your presentations as well.